I'm Mary Venzel White, and this is Creative Space Chats with Writers. In these 30-minute interviews, we explore creativity and the writing life, inspiration, community, and ways to spark creativity for writers and everyone else. Today, my guest is Makenna Myers, a writer, podcast host. I'll get that out of the way early. That'll be my only mistake. Graduate student and library specialist. She joins me from San Diego, where she is home for the summer before returning to St. Paul, Minnesota, where she'll complete her MFA in writing for young people at Hamline University. Welcome, Makenna, and thank you so much for coming to chat with me.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm very, very excited.
I was looking forward to it all day. I think both of us have realized that our task will be to just keep it to the 30 minutes because we always have so much to talk about. So let's go. So you and I met 3 years ago when you were a student in my Writing for Kids and Teens class at Concordia University. It was my first time teaching the class, and I felt at that time you probably could have gotten up and taught us all a thing or two, particularly about your love middle grade fiction. Your final project for the class was the beginning of a novel about an adolescent, about many things, but about an adolescent dealing with her mother's cancer, battle with cancer. And it's still one of the most sophisticated pieces of writing that I've had the pleasure to read as a professor. You're very talented. So let's start by talking about middle grade, which I think we both are super hyped about. You more than me, but I'm getting there. It's a very exciting category. What drew you to middle grade fiction? What would you say are some of the characteristics of the genre, and specifically what drew you in?
Absolutely. This is something I could talk for way more than a half an hour about. So
I know. Should I give you a timer?
Maybe. But middle grade fiction, technically defined by publishers, is literature for the ages of 8 to 12. So that's a pretty wide age range. But I think what makes middle grade special to me is that really that 8 to 12 age range is the last ditch effort that you have to get kids to become lifelong readers. You know, it's when before the pressures of adolescence set in and suddenly, you know, reading isn't something cool anymore. So as an author, it's like, I want to reach you at that time when you're at this vulnerable point. And for kids as readers too, they still have that magic, that childhood magic with reading, but also the emotional complexity, you know, bordering on adolescent, to understand complex themes and whatnot. And the marriage of those two in middle grade, I find to be really compelling and emotionally resonant. So that's why I love middle grade so much. And also my own middle school years were so wildly awkward. And I love reflecting on that. And it's just an age that I have a whole lot of passion for.
It's a middle school, which middle grade doesn't necessarily correlate to middle school because you can get younger readers and older readers, but it is such a tumultuous time with such a range of kids are at such a range of different developmental. I mean, how do you go about writing for middle grade knowing that it's such a range?
I think it's difficult, though. More recently, middle grade has been divided into upper and lower middle grade, which are becoming firmer categories. And I think a really good example of what that means is comparing two books. One is called Things That Surprise You by Jen Mascari, and then Good Enough by Jen Petra-Roy. Both have 12-year-old protagonists and deal with eating disorders. But Things That Surprise You is about a 12-year-old girl watching her teenage sister go through recovery. And Good Enough, though, is also about a 12-year-old who goes through an eating disorder herself. And both are totally valid perspectives for middle graders to experience. So you've got to reach both levels. And sometimes that can require a different story or just, you know, tenderness somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and since you were that age until now, how has middle grades changed? I mean, I feel like it's becoming more like young adult. It used to be that you would stay away from topics like eating disorders and things like that in middle grade, and it was all about adventure and a lot of humor. And I think those things are still there, but I feel like part of the thing that makes it middle grade so exciting is that this rapid expansion is becoming more like young adult. And I always tell students when I start my class, it's like saying young adult is like saying fiction, because there's such a range. And I feel like middle grade is sort of opening up like that too.
I agree. It's kind of forging a bridge in between young adult and middle grade that wasn't necessarily there before, that helps readers transition, more easily into those teenage years through fiction.
And I think kids are growing up faster and they're having to deal with things earlier.
Absolutely.
What would you like to see in future middle grade?
Just even more voices, just more diverse voices and perspectives, because that's how we gain empathy. There have been so many studies done about the empathetic power of children's literature, creating real lasting change in the life of students. So
yeah,
I love that.
Yeah. Do you see yourself writing mostly in middle grade?
I do. Middle grade is just my favorite place to be, but that doesn't mean I don't want to visit other places as well. I've had other ideas for picture books based on my own childhood. And then recently, my past semester, I was writing what could arguably be classified as a YA novel because the characters were 14 and my advisor said, this is YA. And I thought, this is middle grade. So really, it's again, that kind of bridge type of novel. So I could visit lots of places.
Yeah, I mean, they say that the 14-year-old protagonist is sort of the most neglected, right?
And that's why I wanted to write it.
Because middle grade cuts off and kids in general want to read up. So
it's frustrating.
You're going to be the one to forge a new path for 14-year-old protagonists.
It's a real passion of mine all of a sudden. And it has a lot to do with when I started writing, which is what we'll talk a little bit about later. But yeah, very important.
So being a writer that's just starting out, I mean, I know that you're probably so focused on your craft right now. I don't know that you're thinking too much about the business side of things or how the landscape looks out there, but how do you see the fiction landscape for emerging writers such as yourself?
It's hard not to be pessimistic when thinking about this question, because I fairly recently interned for a man who was trying to get his work published, and I submitted all of his queries. I probably submitted over 50. We didn't hear back from most of those, and when we did, it was in the negative, but just most were non-responses, which is wildly discouraging. And I know one day I'm going to have to go through that process as well, which is probably why I feel pessimistic about it, but I'm also persistently hopeful that one day I will make the right connection with an agent, because that's not something to take lightly, and that you're pairing with somebody for hopefully the duration of your career, much like a marriage, and how can we support each other and create the best kind of landscape for my literature. So it's something that I take very seriously. I know it's going to be difficult, but I look forward to the result at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to depress you even further, but 50 is not that many.
No, it really wasn't. I worked for him for a very short time.
It can be more than that.
So, oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and things in the outside world, obviously the pandemic has shut down publishing and made it operate even more slowly than it was before, but there's always something new on the horizon. Books are always going to, persevere. Do you have goals for your writing career as far as creatively, topics, you talked about more diversity. How do you see your writing in terms of themes or things you want to explore?
Oh, man. Oh, that's a lot of fun. I really do love contemporary middle grade. That's something I feel very comfortable writing, and I think there's just endless possibility for stories to be told in a traditional middle school setting. But outside of that, I love light science fiction, I guess it is.
Okay.
Kind of fantastical world.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of unexpected from recently in my life too, but I love those kind of soft science fiction worlds where it's our world, but a little bit different, not quite fantasy, just altered in some way. There's just endless kind of themes you can explore in changing little details about our reality. And I think I'd love to dip into YA at some point. I don't know how, like real traditional YA with a teenage protagonist, but those are future goals.
How do you think that kind of relates to magical realism? None of this was on your prep work, but no, you can answer.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like science fiction is based more in truth, in that there's kind of a seed where, oh, that's a little bit of believable science, where magical realism can just be some unexplained fantastical element, I suppose. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of current movies and series and things that certainly deal with all of the otherworldly things. I think there always has been, but I'm saying I feel like that is becoming more complex too, the ways that we can represent alternative realities. And I'm thinking of all these shows that are around. My son and I are watching Stranger Things right now. We never watched it. And I don't even know for sure what category I would put that in, those traditional fantasy, this or that,
Those in between genres.
It's exciting.
What I want to write in, yeah. not like Star
Yeah.
Trek.
Yeah, right. It's exciting. So W. Somerset Maugham said, there are 3 rules for writing the novel, and unfortunately, no one knows what they are. That's his famous quote. Why did you decide to pursue an MFA? How did you choose a program? What was your thought process there?
Absolutely. I think there were 2 main reasons I decided to pursue the MFA. And the first one is because I don't think I'll be more able to pursue it at any other time in my life than I am now. I'm an unattached 23-year-old without a job that demands much of me outside of the hours of 8 to 4:30. And I just, this is the perfect time for me to jump into it in those very practical senses. And then also, the second main reason, the more important reason, is that I love to learn. I love children's literature, and I just want to dive in and explore everything about it that I possibly can. And I love the teacher-student relationship of being in mentorship. I find very inspiring and empowering, and just being in a community of like-minded writers, all pursuing the same kind of educational goal, is so thrilling to me. And that's just all I wanted out of an MFA, and what I certainly have found so far. And choosing a program was difficult. I made a lot of spreadsheets. I read a lot of magazines, researched.
That does not surprise me.
So many
surprise me knowing you a little bit.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was so much information, but I whittled it down to 6. I applied to 6. I got into 6. What a blessing. And then I had to decide where to go. And it ultimately came down to whether I would go to Hamlin, which is a low residency program, meaning I would not have to move from San Diego. It's digital, which is pretty neat. Or whether I would move across the country to Boston. And I ultimately decided on Hamlin because of the incredible faculty that I would maybe get a chance to work with. Multiple Newbery medalists and other, I think they have a Stonewall Award winner, a Prince winner, just everybody is so incredible at the Hamlin faculty. So that's why I ultimately chose that school.
Okay, so I thought that you had gone out there. I feel like in our discussion you talked, are you going out there this next year?
It's funky. It's a weird program. So over the course of the 2 semesters there, you go to 5 10-day residencies. So you're doing most of your coursework asynchronously, kind of just via email with your advisor.
Okay.
If that was unclear. It's a really strange setup.
Okay. All right.
It's very good though.
Well, I mean, again, this is off topic, but the whole educational landscape was already changing towards a lot more of these type of options. And of course, fast forwarded with the pandemic, and it's not a bad thing because there should be more options for ways to, yeah.
And it's designed for people who this is their second career, and you can work 40 hours a week and do this program and have a family. It's for people to really be able to balance writing with their life. And what they always say at Hamlin is that the program is meant to mimic the working writer's life, in that when you leave the program, it's not like you're, leaving behind these workshops and all of this, physical structure that you're relied upon. You already know what it's like to be a working writer. That's something I really value about the low residency model.
Yeah, I mean, so I did not go to MFA program. I did my master's in English, and so I came to writing through reading, reading and you and I've talked about the 2 sides of the coin, right? Deconstructing stories and then also constructing stories, and so some of the debate for people with MFA programs has to do with that structure. Can you kind of describe, you described for me the other day a little bit the structure at Hamlin, and I was very surprised to hear that there actually is that other side of the coin in the MFA program as far as research and so you can, I know we're already getting close, but can you describe a little bit, the process? Oh, it's fine.
Okay.
We'll go over.
Super cool.
What are we going to do?
Yeah, that's fair. So you spend 2 years at Hamlin, which is divided into 4 semesters. And each semester you submit 4 packets of work each month. And each packet is made up of 40 pages of creative work and then a selection of critical work where you're analyzing the work of other writers in some form or fashion. And that builds up to your 3rd semester critical thesis, where you write a 15 to 25 page paper on pretty much any topic that you want, and then present it at your residency following your 3rd semester. So, and then in your 4th semester, you're just writing your fiction thesis, which is about 100 pages of work. So that's the general structure of the program. And then on top of that, every semester you're reading 10 books per packet and annotating them. So it's a total of, I think, 120 that you read when you graduate the program. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's Stephen King. I don't have it, but he has a quote too about the way to become a writer is to read a lot and write a lot.
Amen to that.
And I think both sides are mutually, lend themselves to each other. completely. And I'm always surprised when students who want to be writers tell me they don't read much. I give a little allowance to college students because you're reading so much other stuff anyway. But it really is so important to not only for to exercise your muscle of how to be a writer, but to learn vocabulary and also just to know what's out there in the world. I think, how do you take your place in it if you don't at least have a general idea of what's come before?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the last question about MFA programs is, again, along the lines of people that sort of debate these things. What would you say to those who feel that MFA programs perhaps exert too much influence over the creativity? And we didn't touch yet either on how specifically you think, if you think that it affects your creative process. How has it affected your creative process being in this structure? Then what would you say to those who feel maybe the method of an MFA program might kind of churn out a group of writers that all are sort of writing the same way?
Sure. I think the first thing I would say is that every MFA program is different. And perhaps there is a horrible MFA program out there that tries to make everybody into the same sort of writer. But that certainly is not what, yeah, right, right. That just doesn't seem like it exists. I hope not. But yeah. Hamline certainly is not like that. Hamline has done nothing but increase my creativity. I work very well within guidelines and constraints, just as a
deadlines.
Deadlines, yeah, deadlines. Yeah. I find very motivating. So I really do love that, and being in a position where I can submit packets of work to an advisor every single month and receive the feedback, in return is very motivating. So I find it very thrilling in terms of my creativity, and also they really give you a lot of freedom to pursue whatever you're interested in. It's come as you are. Present whatever writing you want, fiction or nonfiction, and we'll just grow and build from there. And also something I think about every MFA program is that every advisor that you have is wildly different, especially at Hamline. So my first advisor, she was a teacher. She was all about, let's dig into the text and find ways that you can grow. Where my second advisor approached my work with more of an editor's mind. And both are totally valid, but they're certainly not shaping me into the same kind of writer. Just very different like very different ways to sharpen my skills.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of an unfair criticism because every writer is affected by their environment. Yes. And whether you're in an MFA program or you're a certain age, living in a certain time, I mean, there have always been types of literature dependent on what time, and there's movements in literature, and everybody's affected by everything else that's out there. I suppose the argument would be that it's a more concentrated effect, but again, you're not, like you say, you're not with the same instructor every time. You're not working with the same people. They're giving you freedom to work on what you want to work on. Tell me about your podcast. So for the viewers, Makenna has a podcast she started last year while you were stuck at home for quarantine, right?
While I was stuck at home and without a job post grad, so it was.
That's a job, though. A lot of young people think podcasting is a job. I mean,
true.
It can be. It can
be. I add in those ads, but the podcast, it's a lot of fun. It's called My Writing Sucks. And the whole basic premise is that I, dig in my back files and pull out those cringy drafts that I wrote when I was 14 and read them to the internet and critique them like I'm critiquing a peer. And it's a whole lot of fun. It's absolutely hilarious. It's a lot of me just laughing in my closet to myself because my 14-year-old self was so cringy. But it's a good time. It's on Spotify or any major streaming platform, and a new season is going up on Saturday, so that's exciting.
So are you going over a new project on the new season?
I am. So my first season was a book called Kree of Canopy, which is the first big story that I wrote. It was a fantasy. And then the second season is the novella I wrote before that one called Letters, which is a YA romance I wrote when I was 13, which is about as bad as it sounds. Oh my gosh. It is, it was a lot.
Is there so when I read things from a long time ago of mine, it's a lot of cringe, but then there's these glimmers, right? Where you're kind of like, this isn't so bad.
Yeah.
Are you getting both of those things?
I found that a lot with Kree of Canopy. There were so many things that I was proud of within it for my 14-year-old self, really testing her mettle for the first time. But with Letters, there was it was a lot more rough than that. It was hard to find what was valuable in there. Still fun
Well,
though. Still so proud of her for sitting down and doing it in the first place.
well, yeah, I mean, not many 13-year-olds have written 2 books, but
Fair enough.
you're
Fair enough.
beyond, we just take for granted that you're kind of beyond the norm. But I would imagine a 13-year-old trying to write a YA romance. Yeah, it's 100% imagination, and
yeah,
which is okay.
Recycling cliches. And I delve into this in the last episode actually, but I realized that Letters was the draft that I thought I was supposed to write, you know, a romance and cliche and whatnot, but Kree of Canopy, the fantasy, was the story I really wanted to tell, where I really found myself as a writer. So I do consider that like kind of the most seminal work of my career in a way. It's when I really began being a writer.
Tell us about, so you talk in the podcast about when you first decided that maybe you could write, right? There was a friend at school that had written something.
Oh, yeah. That was such a special time. I was 12 in 6th grade, and my friend Christina, I haven't talked to her since we were like 14. She ran up to me with a composition book and was like, "Makenna, read the story I wrote." And it's like, kids can write stories? And my mind just was blown. So I got my own little composition book and started writing my own stories. And I would, people always saying like I didn't stop from there, but I definitely did stop from there. And it took a while to get my groove. But once I did, then I didn't stop.
It's just a classic representation, right? Imagining that you can do something like that because you saw somebody else do it.
Yeah.
What would your words of encouragement be to other 12-year-olds out there who are so, I mean, there's 22-year-olds and 32-year-olds and 42-year-olds that, let's just give advice to everyone. Like
everybody.
How do you, as far as completing a novel, because that's a big thing, right? I mean, and when I assign in my class a 20-25 paper, like eyes glaze over at the 25 pages, it seems like so much.
It does.
How do you break it down for a young writer? How would you go about writing an entire book?
Ooh, I think I would remind them that there is no pressure for perfection. And the tagline of my podcast is actually, a first draft's only job is to exist. So if you have words on the page, you're doing the right thing. And, you know, this is your story to tell also. You have to want to tell it. So don't do it because anybody else is telling you to. Don't write the story that you think you should be writing. Write the one that you can't get out of your heart, as corny as that sounds.
No, it's not corny at all. And I think that there's a lot to that, because we do, and we've kind of skirted around with the whole MFA and, you know, learning how to write versus coming about it from other ways. But I do think that if you go with your heart, it's going to take you farther than if you're trying to be cerebral and accomplish certain types of things with your book. I think we've all read those books that are very well constructed and we respect everything they did, but they just didn't hit us in the heart. And those two sides, right? The intellectual side can appreciate it. And maybe sometimes I read a book and I think, oh, it'd be so fun to study this book, but I didn't love it because it doesn't have, you know, that what you're talking about. And if you start with that place, writing something that feels very important to you, writing something that feels like you have to write about it, that's probably more likely to come across to the reader.
Absolutely.
Don't you think?
Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah. So I was going to ask about just kind of storytelling in general in your life. Obviously you read a lot of books. Is that from a very young age?
You know, surprisingly, I was not a voracious reader as a kid. I wasn't like tearing into every book at the library on my bookshelf. What I really did was read the same books over and over again. Story was a form of comfort for me in 3 very specific books that I still have. One is right next to me. Smile by Raina Telgemeier. I think I showed this off in your class last semester, but I read it until the cover fell off. It was just my very favorite thing. So storytelling has always been a form of comfort for me in receiving story, but also telling my own.
Do you ingest storytelling in other forms? Visual, movies, everything?
Every single form. Oh my goodness. I love TV shows, movies, plays, music. I find all as equally stirring as literature. So it's just story and creativity in every form I deeply appreciate and love interacting with in some way or another.
I did not prep you on talking about this either, but I don't care. How do you feel? It's something that's very close to my heart. And as you know, in my class, we do, well, you don't know, you took the writing class. You took the English one too. We do a section on graphic novels. So very close to my heart is the whole, just thinking about visuals. I'm a big film buff. And how do you see the world that we live in kids being so grown up on visual storytelling. What do you think the ramifications are that are for regular books with all these visual types of storytelling we have? Think it's a good thing, a bad thing, a challenge?
I think they're just different ways to intake media. I don't know if they can necessarily be juxtaposed against one another, though the way you intake literature might change if you're only used to, receiving story in this visual format. Though I don't think kids can't be then reacclimated to taking story in a less visually appealing way, I guess. And then eventually they'll find, that these like black and white static symbols on the page can produce just as wonderful, thrilling images in my mind as they, that appear on the page, and to an extent that they can manipulate themselves and imagine this world however they want. And I think there's a lot of freedom in that. Because in a movie, you're presented with one picture. It is, you can't change it. But
one version. They're telling you
anything you want it.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it for me too. The freedom to be able to be in your mind, as opposed to, I remember one time I was working on a novel and I was having a tough spot, and they said, get some visual cues, and every writer's different. This might be a good thing for you, but I wanted to like visualize the characters. And once I did, I hated it. I got pictures off the internet because I thought this will help me like build exactly what you're saying. Did not like that. No.
It's so limiting somehow.
Yes.
It's only supposed to exist up here.
Yeah, and maybe a little hazy in a way too. How do you hope to sustain and nurture your creativity over your lifetime? We talked about your MFA program, which you very wisely decided to do because you have the freedom and time to do it right now. And obviously life is going to intervene, and you probably have to, you're working a job now, but when you have less time for writing, or less mental energy, maybe you build a family, or maybe you travel the world. How do you hope to sustain and sort of nurture your creativity? And then also maybe there'll be, publishing disappointments, or lots of queries unanswered, which we all have.
Oh my goodness, yes. I think it all comes down to being willing to take breaks and step away and recognize when you're tired, and just being able to rest. Otherwise, burnout can creep in, and that doesn't feel good. I recently had to take a step back from a project I was working on, relentlessly pursuing a deadline I set for myself. But once I let go of that, I was able to lean into a lot of other creative projects that I had been wanting to do and fulfill my creative needs in other ways. And I know eventually that story will be there, ready for me when I'm ready to return to it. But there are lots of different ways to fill the creative well for me. It doesn't necessarily have to be about reading or writing. I do find physical movement helps a lot. I've really been trying to get into running, which is not fun, but I'm trying to push the distance, get myself further. And when I do that, I feel looser as a human in a good way. And I've also started doing roller derby, which is I know. Waha. It's surprisingly, it's great, because the only thing I'm thinking about when I'm on the track is not falling on my butt and, moving on 8 wheels. And it's really freeing. So having different outlets, I think, throughout my life for various forms of creativity, but will be really important to sustaining my writing life.
I think so too. Now, when you say roller derby, my brother and I used to get up early when we were kids and watch roller. When you knock people over, is that what you're talking?
Sort of, yes, in summation. Okay. But there's like a WWE version of roller derby that's like flipping the gals over rails, and then there's the real sport of it, which is a little bit different, but still a full contact sport. You're fully padded though, so it's fine.
That sounds like that would be enjoyable.
It's very
on roller
enjoyable.
Skates and knocking into people when you're frustrated.
It's great. If you want a really good taste of what roller derby is, oddly, read the graphic novel Roller Girl by Victoria Jameson. It's incredible. I wrote a paper about
I believe
that.
I have that after your recommendation.
Oh, you should read it. One of my favorites.
I will eventually. It's my big goal every semester not to acquire too many more graphic novels, but I'm losing that battle.
It's a difficult goal to keep.
Would you ever write a graphic novel?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would just need to be paired with the right artist and have the right story that would require the visual medium. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. I just had like 1,000 thoughts that went that way of interesting things that might make graphic novels.
Right. Sorry.
Oh no.
It's such an interest. Yeah. I mean, I won't go on about graphic novels.
Oh, you just put me on a rabbit hole. Oh, geez. Okay.
Okay. We'll just write down a few ideas in a notebook for later.
They'll stay there.
And start looking online for an artist. But yeah. One final question. Finish this sentence. If I did not have creativity in my life, I
would be very bored. I would just go to work and come home, and what would I do? Just watch TV, see people. I think writing is the way that I interact with the world, and without it, just wouldn't be as interesting.
Yeah, I think if you're, born to it, you have to be writing or immersing yourself in storytelling in some way, or you just don't feel like yourself, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I think we actually stayed under the 30 minutes.
Seriously.
I feel like we've really kind of went through the checklist because I wanted to talk about all the topics.
Oh, yeah.
We have a couple minutes though for you to tell me, do you want to talk about your project that
Absolutely.
I haven't stopped thinking about it.
Oh, really? I'm excited. That's great.
Tell us really quickly about your new middle grade.
Sure. So next semester, I'll be delving into what I thought was an impossible genre, the middle grade zombie novel. It'll be a lot of fun. It's a fusion of World War Z meets Anne of Green Gables, because I thought a really idealistic kind of rosy-eyed character was the only way that you could approach such a gory world in a kid-friendly way. And it's a very physical journey. We've got another perspective from a boy who's been trapped inside his whole life and has no idea what's going on. And we meet 3 really quirky guys that she goes on the journey with, who kind of become 3 surrogate dads. And I don't want to go too far into it because I'll go off on a rabbit hole, but middle grade zombie novel. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. And I mean, I hate to say it, but I could see that in a graphic novel form after.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be fun. That'd be a challenge though, for it to not be too gory. Because with words, you can get away with a lot of implication, but pictures, we'll see. Woo, exciting.
Just put it on your list, Makenna.
Oh, yeah. Long list.
Thank you so much for talking with me. And I will talk to you soon, I'm sure, in some other capacity. Love to catch up with you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.